Alright, so today we're diving into AMD's latest attempt to separate you from your hard-earned cache, the 9800X3D. It has the same number of cores and L3 stacked cache as the previous generation 7800X3D, however it can reach higher clock frequencies along with a few other changes. So the question here is, does it make Tarkov run any better, and are those extra FPS even noticeable? Or should you just save your money and go with the good old 7800X3D? Let's put them to the test and find out in today's episode of Face Off. First up, let's crack open what's actually inside these chips. The 7800X3D and the 9800X3D are the two latest Ryzen X3D processors, and as X3D chips, they've got that sweet stacked cache that lets them juggle all the calculations Tarkov throws at them. Now, here's what's different. The 9800X3D still has that big 96 megabyte L3 cache, but instead of sitting on top of the cores like in the 7800X3D, AMD has now moved it to the underside to improve heat transfer to the heat spreader. This gives the 98 more thermal headroom, and the ultimate result is the first overclockable X3D chip from AMD. Now, while there's a lot of hype surrounding the overclocking potential, one important change that's flying under the radar is the increase in L1 cache from 512 kilobytes to 640 kilobytes. Also, there are some architectural tweaks that increase the bandwidth to the L2 cache. So in theory, these changes should mean more FPS, but in theory is a beautiful place where everything works perfectly, and Nikita doesn't laugh at our feeble attempts to get good FPS on streets. So let's see how much of an increase all these changes add up to in the real world. Alright, here's the setup we're working with for both CPUs. We've got a Gigabyte X670E Aorus Extreme motherboard paired with 64 gigabytes of SK Hynix A-Die DDR5, a Gigabyte Aorus 10K Gen 5 M2 NVMe, and an MSI Gaming Trio 4090. Cooling is handled by a Corsair H115i Elite 280mm AIO. RAM timings have been tightened, and both CPUs are PBO undervolted with boost clock overrides for optimal performance. We're running my Pure 80 preset, a custom optimized setting for higher end systems. If you're interested in tuning your settings, check out my settings optimization guide linked in the upper right hand corner. Alright, let's dive into the good stuff now. The frames. Normally when I'm doing these comparisons, I start with an offline test on factory to set a baseline for performance, and then I take it to streets in both offline and online modes. Factory's rework looks awesome, but it puts a lot more strain on the hardware, so I've decided to switch things up and use labs as the baseline test for performance. I think it's a better choice because labs currently offers the best performance of any map. Now, here are the routes I used on both maps. Here's the labs route, and here is the streets route. I started on Klimov and ended up on Lexos. Usually those are the two areas where the performance is the worst. I ran 3 tests on each route at 1080, 1440, and 4K and took averages for the comparison. So buckle up and let's jump right into the results. Alright, so let's take a look at the results from the labs comparison. In 1080, the 9800X3D delivers about a 10% increase in average FPS and about a 13-14% increase in both the 1% and 0.1% low FPS. Moving on to 1440, again the 9800X3D has about a 10% advantage over the 7800X3D with 400.9 versus 361.8, and again in the 1% and 0.1% it's about a 12 to 13% advantage. One thing to note here is that both chips maintained roughly the same numbers whether it was 1080 or 1440. Moving on to 4K, again the average FPS is about 10% more with the 9800X3D and about 11% more on the 1%. Very similar to the trends we were seeing with 1080 and 1440. However, in 4K, the 0.1% was 25% better for the 9800X3D. That's a significant difference, and that means the 9800X3D handles this resolution a lot more effectively. Alright, now we're heading into the CPU meat grinder, the streets of Tarkov. This map is a real test for your CPU because it's going to push that hardware to the limit. I kicked things off with some offline runs to get a baseline on performance, and here's what I found. In 1080, the 9800X3D delivered about an 18% boost in average FPS, 179.3 versus 151.9, making gameplay smoother, especially in lower frame rate situations. The 1% low was 17% better for the 9800X3D, and very interestingly, the 0.1% low was a massive 48% better on the 9800X3D. Overall, this made a huge difference in how smooth the gameplay felt. In 1440, Again, the 9800X3D was close to 20% better at 19% over the 7800X3D, 176.4 versus 148. The 1% low difference was again close at 16.8% over the 7800X3D, 139.9 versus 119.7. And in 1440, the 0.1% low FPS was still a lot better, but the margin wasn't as large. It was a 29.5% increase over the 7800X3D at 119.4 versus 92.2. Still shows that it's superior at handling the performance dips on streets. And in the highest resolution 4K, the 9800X3D had a modest 3.1% increase over the 7800X3D. The 1% low, they were almost identical, and the 0.1% low again was almost identical within margin of error. So in 4K, offline at least, there was similar performance and they were almost identical. So those results were all well and good, almost like I expected in a next generation chip. The number differences in offline testing were noticeable, but nothing mind-blowing, you know? However, when I took these systems into online raids, that's where the 9800X3D really flexed its muscles. It just highlighted how heavy online Tarkov really is. The maps themselves have some weight, sure, but the real grind is in the AI. And this test, I think it really shows that. So in 1080 online on streets, the 9800X3D averaged a massive 37.2 increase over the 7800X3D. This significantly improved smoothness and playability. The 1% low had an eye-popping 42.4% improvement over the 7800X3D, maintaining over 100 FPS on the 1% low on streets. This made the performance really stable during online gameplay. The 0.1% low also had a huge increase at 34.6 over the 7800X3D. So this just made the gameplay feel extremely buttery smooth. In 1440, again, the 9800X3D maintaining a 32.9% increase over the 7800X3D, resulting in very smooth gameplay. The 1% low was 41% better at 107.4 versus 76.2, and the 0.1% low was a massive 45.5% better over the 78. Just crazy numbers. Moving on to 4K, where I expected things to even out a little bit, the 9800X3D maintained its edge at 30% over the 7800X3D, and it wasn't even that much lower than it was in 1080 and 1440. So it was 126.1 versus 97. The 1% low, a 41% increase over the 7800X3D, maintaining almost a 100 FPS 1% low in 4K on streets. Just insane. And the 0.1% low on the 9800X3D was a dramatic 53% better at 82.3 versus 53.8. Ultimately, this meant that the gameplay felt significantly smoother and just buttery smooth in whatever resolution I was playing in. So you might think more FPS means more power, right? Well, with the 9800X3D, there's a little twist. Since the V-cache is now placed under the CCD, thermal transfer is way better. This means it runs cooler than the 7800X3D, which already had pretty decent temps, by the way. And because it runs cooler, it can draw more power. So yeah, the 9800X3D does pull a bit more power than its sibling, but it does so more efficiently, and that keeps things cooler overall. As I showed you in a previous Air vs AIO cooling test on the 7800X3D, as long as you have a cooler, you're pretty much in the clear. The X3Ds are just naturally cool beasts. If you want to dive deeper into that, I've got a link in the upper right hand corner for that video here. Go ahead and check that out if you're interested. But with the 9800X3D running even cooler, the same rule applies. That said, I will be doing similar testing on the 9800X3D in the near future to get even more specifics on that. Bottom line, 9800X3D draws a little more power, but it runs even cooler and more efficiently for those of you curious about power efficiency and temps. So, is the 9800X3D worth it over the 7800X3D? Well, the 7800X3D is already a beast of a gaming CPU, but when it comes to Tarkov, the game's hunger for memory bandwidth really starts to shine, and that's where the 9800X3D flexes hard. It's got a ton of that bandwidth. On most maps, the 7800X3D already delivers extreme performance, but when you hit streets of Tarkov, the 9800X3D does take things to the next level. It pushes smooth gameplay with high FPS, even approaching 144 at any resolution. Now, both the 78 and the 9800X3D are currently over their retail prices of $449 and $479 respectively, thanks to the scalpers looking to cash in on the hype. But I wouldn't sweat it. AMD is not running low on stock, and I expect prices to settle down in the next few months. Honestly, both of these chips are solid value for top tier gaming, especially since you don't need an expensive motherboard or fast RAM to get the most out of them. I've done the test to prove it. If you want to see some of those, check the upper right hand corner for those links. If the 7800 X3D drops under $400, it's a killer deal and a slight edge and bang for the buck, but if the 9800 X3D ever hits retail price again, it'll be tough to ignore. It all comes down to what you're looking for. If you're a 4K gamer or just want the best in class performance, then the 9800 X3D is your ticket. But if you're chasing the best value right now, look at your budget and consider if the 7800 X3D's performance is enough for you, especially since the 9800 X3D is still widely overpriced in most places. Plus, the 7800 X3D will hold its value, so you could potentially pick one up now for less, use it for a while, and then resell it to upgrade to a 9800 X3D later when the prices finally calm down. Alright, that's a wrap for this comparison. What do you think? Is the 9800 X3D worth the upgrade over the 7800 X3D? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, especially if you've tested either one in Tarkov. If you found this comparison useful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth hardware breakdowns and guides. We're so close to hitting our goal of 10k subs, just about 1,000 to go. And don't forget to join the Pyurologie Discord, now over 1,000 members strong. It's full of knowledgeable, respectful folks. I'm always down to chat as well. My username is Pyuri. Good luck on your raids, and I'll catch you in the next one.